and welcome to the Ripple Impact podcast, where we dive into those unseen moments, the unexpected turns, the quiet ripples that shape extraordinary lives and bold careers. We launched our podcast with a special series of Live from Cannes, so what better way to start our weekly podcast series than with a creative disruptor? Today's guest is a man who's made creativity his business, Duncan Bruce, who is a creative disruptor, a brand whisperer, and who kicked off his career at a wide-eyed graduate trainee at none less Leo Burnett, one of the world's biggest names in advertising. And today he's the founder of the Brand Conspiracy. Duncan's client list is a who's who of the global giants, including Adidas, Unilever, Nestle, Bosch, Samsung, Cirque du Soleil and reconnect, just to name a few. And if brands have dared to dream big, chances are Duncan has probably worked with them and has been in the mix. He's the co-author of the Dream Café. So welcome to Duncan, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us. We worked together at PepsiCo, right? And did some amazing, wonderful, weird offsites and brand dream workshops were just incredible. So that's how we met and how we've come to be here today. You've been an inspiration to me since then, so I'm delighted that you're here actually for our very first weekly podcast. So it's a pleasure for me to have you here with us. And can you start by just giving our audience just a little insider track on your incredible career?
I don't know if it's an incredible career, but thank you. It sounds good. I often I joke with some of my colleagues about, we have a sort of top trumps of which clients have you worked with or which reception areas have you sat in. And I often say rather arrogantly, I'm not sure there's any client somewhere that I haven't touched over 30 odd years or so, somewhere. It's interesting because calling me a creative disruptor, it's all very flattering. Thank you. Starting as a graduate trainee was interesting in those days because some of the audience I'm sure will know, in those days, going into a big ad agency as a graduate trainee was almost like doing a master's postgraduate type thing. It doesn't quite exist now. But one of the things I learned very quickly in the couple of years I was there was that actually I wanted to be on the creative side of the industry and the business, which was almost impossible to go into. Unless you'd been to art school and you were that sort of person. I remember asking the then creative director, quite a famous guy who shall remain nameless, walking up to the top floor of the Burnett's offices and saying, "Please, sir, can I join your team?" And he said, no, stay downstairs with your suit and your tie and stay there. And that was, and then I remember leaving on a Friday, talking of disruption. On the Monday, I started my first business with the title creative director. And I thought it was hilarious that I could sort of go from graduate trainee to, just because it said on a business card. Do you remember business cards? They were good things. And one of the first people I saw was actually Sir John Hegarty, who gave me a project to do, and never forgotten that.
Amazing. So grad trainee on the Friday and creative director on the Monday.
Exactly.
I love that tenacity.
That was real disruption.
That is real disruption.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you in a suit and tie. It doesn't fit with your creative flair.
No, I'll have to find a picture one day. But and then really I've my potted history is I've run what to me is the same company for the last sort of 30 years, although I've bought and sold and moved continents. I was in North America, in Toronto and New York for 6-7 years, and then back. But it's always been around the same theme of disruption and alternative thinking and trying to work with my own teams internally in a different way. And then actually, as you've experienced, Laura, as you mentioned with PepsiCo, working with client teams to help them think in right brain differently, more passionately, more specifically.
Amazing. So let's wind back the tape a little bit. What was the first pivotal moment that set you off on a trajectory of advertising? What was that ripple moment?
On advertising, it was a really interesting ripple moment, actually, because I'm actually a musician in my soul. I'm a bass player, still am. So available for gigs. Anybody watching it?
Yeah. Well, you must send us the link to the Spotify, and we'll put it on this.
My band's called The Original Boys. Check it out.
Nice.
Anyway, I was a musician, and I was sort of wondering what to do really. And I eventually met a cousin of my dad's, and who was a big property developer I always remember, in the centre of London, big offices with a massive desk. And he sort of invited me up, and he sort of said, "My boy," and he was the first person to say to me in my entire education and career, "What are you interested in?" So this was the ripple moment for me. And I still remember with such affection that he said, "What are you interested in?" I remember saying, well, music and photography and film and making things happen. And he said, "What about advertising?" And I remember saying, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, when you watch television and there are commercials, there are companies, agencies that do that." And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And that was a massive ripple moment. And then through a connection, I got into Burnett.
Amazing. I'm not sure if I've ever been asked that or asked myself that.
And
What
you
am I
know what?
interested in?
Now I spend a lot of time when I talk to, my kids or younger people anywhere. I always do that. And people are rarely asked that. It's so important. What are you actually in, particularly now with Gen Z? I have a Gen Z daughter, and she's actually doing film at the university. But if she doesn't do something she's interested in, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and following your passion, right? And having the confidence to go, this is something I really love, and let's go for it. Yeah, that's fantastic. You often talk about kind of serendipitous moments. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm passionate about the happy accident, as I call it.
Nice.
And I think that I read something many moons ago about that the coincidence is the norm. When coincidences don't happen, that's not the norm. So, we all say, "My God, I walked into so-and-so the other day in the high street. And how did that happen?" Or the phone call. Those are the norm. I think the thing is to be aware and to listen and hear them. And there's one of my favorite brand stories, which I'm probably going to paraphrase horribly wrongly. It was the invention of the Polaroid camera, done by a guy called Dr. Land, who was on the beach with his 9-year-old daughter in California, I think. And they were taking family photographs. And you remember when you had film in a camera and you went click, it's the last film. He had that situation. And he said to his daughter, "Oh, we'll pop into the drugstore on the way home to get them processed so we can show mummy." And the little girl said, "But Daddy, why can't I see them now?" And he was a chemist, a scientist. He said, "Yeah, why can't you see them now?" And that was the origins of the Polaroid. And that's that happy accident. It's those little moments. And some of the work I do ever since and now is creating an environment that is disruptive emotionally and metaphysically and physically, location-wise, as you've experienced, and then allowing those accidents to be heard and acknowledged.
Yeah, I love that because it's such a naive, simple question, isn't it? But it's also just a beautiful insight of, well, why can't we just see it now? That's
Exactly.
fantastic. I love that. So, how do you go about creating these disruptive environments with a client where they're going from back-to-back meetings and, they've got budgets to think about and they've got the next project, the next exec flying in and everything's happening? How do you get clients out of that day to day and what I call the barcode meetings where your diary just looks like this, like do, 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 do. How do you get clients to really get into a disruptive mindset and space so they can allow that creativity and inspiration to come?
Well, the ripple moment, I suppose, is, and my problem, my challenge always is, if you remember when we maybe first met a long time ago, is me coming in and saying, "Well, I'm going to take your team away for, a couple of nights. Trust me, I'm not going to tell you where we're going. We might be on a mountaintop in Spain. We might be, in a Swiss chalet. We might be in the wilds of Oxfordshire, and just trust me and come with it." And that's the big issue, is how potential clients receive that. And that's quite a challenge. Having said that, though, Laura, I think, these days with everything that's happened to us all since the pandemic, through technology, the fact we're doing this, I think people are now much more open to adventure and possibility.
Yeah,
But
I hope
the
so.
ripple moment for me, realizing it could happen, was that, and I think we talked about this once before, but I was I was working with a friend, or rather having a drink with a friend who was, one of those more traditional team development guys. You remember
Oh yeah.
in the 90s, you sort of abseiled down mountains
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah. Oh,
built
got to get across a river and
exactly all that stuff.
yeah.
And we were together one Sunday afternoon, and he said to me, what are you doing this week? I said, oh, I've got a meeting with someone called Laura Barber in her office in Reading on Wednesday, and I've
Yeah.
got to sit and write something on Thursday. I said, what are you doing? And he said, I always remember, he said, I'm taking the board of directors of this major blue chip company on a Jeep safari across the Sierra Nevada. And I said,
You want to be
oh my,
doing that and not coming and
I
meeting
want.
me.
And that was a big ripple moment,
Yeah.
because it then forced me to say, how do I bring some of that into the world of brand development, brand
Yeah.
disruption, and helping people, inviting people is a better way than
Yeah.
getting to think differently.
Yeah. And do you know what? It was such a pivotal moment for me in my career, and it was a ripple impact moment for me. And I think partly as well, it was the last time I've done something like that since. Because it was in 2019 when we did that brand dream workshop with you guys. Or was it beginning of 2020? And it was just before COVID. And do you know what? Even then, before COVID had happened, before we even knew that was coming, it was so needed because the brand team needed that fresh inspiration and connection and disruption to allow us to reform new visions, new dreams for the brand and for the strategy and for the team. And I remember us all walking away from that week with just such an inspired new perspective on ourselves, candidly, but also the work that we were doing, the brand and the team that we were part of. So it was one of the most incredible workshops I've ever done. So I would highly
Wow.
advocate for people just to call Duncan and just say, can you help us with our brand and our business and our team? So I would highly advocate what you guys are doing. It was fantastic. And you know what? That was before COVID. I would say it's even more important now because we've
Yeah.
almost gone even further away from creativity and disruption because we're stuck to our laptops. We're doing calls like this. We're in teams. We're going through the monotony of the day-to-day process that is life and is business and is needed and necessary. But you have to step away sometimes to allow yourself the freedom to explore and to experiment and to disrupt. And that's exceptionally hard to do in an office, in your 9 to 5, behind a laptop. So I think the more people and brands can do that, the better they will be, for sure. You must have seen some amazing experiences and stories of those realization moments with clients.
Yeah, I mean, now it's really interesting, Laura, because now it's even more important because of COVID, because of the working from home. I'm working with a team at the moment. We're about to do an event in the beginning of July, and there's about 60 or 70 people in this group. But the senior client, our main client, tried to get everybody works from home. On this in this particular organization. She wanted to get the whole team together about 6 months ago, and did an online day workshop. And out of 100 people, 22 turned up online.
Wow.
Online.
Yeah.
I think we've got a new problem now. One of the most important things that we're starting to do with clients is bringing them back together, or giving them a purpose to come back together again, giving them
absolutely.
a reason, even if it's for 2 days out of 3 months, but bringing them together in a inspiring, passionate, disruptive, ripply way. That's even more important now. And then people go back to their bedrooms and work there.
Yeah, and allowing for those, as you call them, those serendipitous moments. You have to almost allow those in, otherwise they're never going
And
to be
there
there to be
always
taken
is.
advantage of.
Exactly. And there always is this serendipitous thing. I remember one of the funniest was we were working with one of the big mineral waters, the brand you'll know very well. We were in the middle of our 2-day extravaganza, and the chairman was there, who was a bit of a fuddy-duddy, stuffy old guy. And the heavens opened on day 2, and it was pouring with rain. And one of the things I do is I really insist that people get out into nature and start hearing and listening, maybe in a city, doesn't matter, but getting out of the room and working. And I forced this group to go out in the pouring rain. And he was absolutely livid. And he came back in and he was grumpy until I pointed out to him that what they were experiencing serendipitously was their
Mm.
product. There was their product was arriving, the water that they sold, there it
Yeah.
was coming down. And it was a really exciting moment because suddenly everybody started laughing and sort of, allowing themselves to immerse themselves in the wetness of the rain and the relevance of it. The relevance.
Yeah, that's so good. And you talked before as well about brands and teams allowing themselves to breathe. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Anybody watching this who doesn't know me, my company is called the brand Conspiracy. The word conspiracy isn't what people think it means. It comes from the Latin conspirare, which means to breathe together. So exactly to your question, Laura, I think it's about breathing in different ways. It's getting away from the restraints of normal
Yeah.
working. Breathing together. So realizing, respecting who you're working with,
Mm.
respecting your colleagues, listening, and jumping in, to the deep end with real people. It's so
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it, with AI and everything that's going to be going on now. I was listening to a podcast last week about, the plus and minuses of AI, and the
Mm.
interesting thing that the leader was saying was that, of course, imagination is the thing that's never going to get replaced.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and however good the AI is, and I'm sure we're all embracing it, I am,
Mm. Mm.
the thing is that human imagination still needs to be there. I wonder whether AI will ever be truly imaginative. It can be creative, but
Yeah.
be imaginative. Not
Yeah,
sure.
that's really interesting you mentioned that because I heard something the other week that was saying we've stopped allowing ourselves the ability to daydream. We haven't forgotten how to do it, but we don't allow ourselves to daydream. I mean, if you commute anywhere in the world, if you're sat on a train or a tube or a subway or whatever, you look around and everyone is on their phone doing something. You don't really see a single face, you see this. Um, and I think it's that ability to daydream and let your imagination flow into new possibilities is so important and something you talk a lot about in your book. And you talked just then about, AI and how that's changing things. We did a couple of live from Cannes spots this week, interviewing people that were there. And obviously AI is the hot topic and the tsunami. Forget the ripples, it's the tsunami of change at the moment in Cannes. And obviously that's one of the big ones. But how has your perspective of the creative industry evolved over time? Because what I thought was really interesting that someone mentioned yesterday, they almost said, where were the creatives at Cannes? Because they were like, all the tech companies are there, AI, it's tech, it's AI, etc. But they were like, I didn't actually feel like I heard from the creatives, which I thought was almost madness. In a week of creativity, where are the creatives? I'm sure they were there, whether they spoke to this person or not, I'm not sure. But I just thought that was a fascinating thought. What's your perspective on
Oh
that?
my goodness. Well, you've touched on a nerve with me. I would expand what you just said. Where are the creatives, period? Have you gone? I'm going to upset, well, I've upset lots of big agencies over the years anyway, but go into any big agency now,
Mm,
the big boys.
mm.
Um, and yeah, I'm going to go for it. It's a podcast. You'll see a lot of,
We like raw honesty on the ripple impact, so you can go for it,
you'll see
Duncan.
a lot of account management, a bit of planning,
Mm,
a bit of sort of project management. But the best creatives are no longer sitting in these big agencies. They don't want to. They're not there.
mm. Where
They're
are they
either,
then?
well, I don't know where they are, but they're not in the heartbeat of the industry. I'm
Mm,
sure a lot of executive creative directors, if they ever heard me saying this, would throw daggers at the screen. But I don't think that the top creatives anymore are in the heartbeat of the big agency world,
mm,
and they're working for themselves more. They've
mm.
just sort of got out of the railway track,
Right.
that the industry is. And it's exciting, I think, to see how many, I'm sure you know a few, but how many smaller, more funky agencies
Mm,
are popping up all over the place. You don't have to be stuck with the traditional agency
sure,
group in the
sure.
traditional way.
And you've hinted at it, but why do you think those creatives are leaving those big organizations to set up their own thing? Why do you think that's happening?
I think because good creatives are disruptors. Good creatives
Mm-hmm.
are alternative thinkers. I'll give you a little sort of side thing. One of my most exciting clients ever was working with Cirque du Soleil in their headquarters in Montreal. And when I was working with them, helping them really define what their brand was all about.
Yeah.
And when I was going there to do this, I was somewhat terrified because I thought, well, they're probably the most creative people I've ever met and ever worked with, which indeed they were. Extraordinary people. But they found themselves in an environment that fostered pure, raw, new thought, creative thought. And if you're in a big agency and you're working for one of the big blue chip food companies, the playground that you're in these days is probably not fostering that raw creative spirit. So if you are that sort of person, how are you going to be fulfilled? And I think therefore people are risking more. And I think the other thing, Laura, is that you no longer have to be working down the tram lines. You work like this, you work independently, you can set up your own company in moments, And lastly, so one of the things that I think I mentioned to you, but still find this fascinating, only about 8-10 years ago, if you were meeting a new client, the first things they would say to you was, well, where are your offices? Do you have offices in Barcelona, Singapore, New York, London, Paris? Now, nobody asks where you are or cares because they are all over the shop as well. And I think that's the other thing about this, the creatives. They know they can do things that doesn't shackle them to a traditional scenario.
Yeah, I was going to say, because your analogy of being on the train tracks feels very structured and ordered and A to B, and you've said before, I hate rules. And I can imagine most creatives do. And that order of structure and train track just doesn't feel like it suits a person who is a true creative.
No.
I mean, we love honest opinions on the ripple impact. That's kind of why we're here. We want the raw, we want the real, we want the candid. I think that's what sparks really good conversations and debate. So, anyone is welcome to chip in and chime in and bring us an alternative view. But I've certainly witnessed that, and I've seen it change quite a lot. But some of my most favorite moments being client side has always been with creatives, because they get you to think in a way that you never have before. Because when you're client side, you are so kind of in love with, dare I say, the category, the brand, the products, if you genuinely are passionate about it, and you should be. But you then end up, within the world of beverages or vegetables or whatever that might be. And actually what creatives allow you to do is to step out of your world into a world of possibilities. And that's where real magic happens. So some of my favorite moments have absolutely been literally sitting with creatives around the table, not sending them stuff. I'm not a big fan of that, but working together and helping them feel what we feel, and then them challenging us completely to feel something completely different that we didn't even know we needed. So yeah, it's always been some of my absolute most favorite moments.
Right, but that's what it should be like. That's what I remember again, a ripple moment, because that's what you want. A massive one was, for me, we were working with one of the major organizations that does a lot of cleaning products. I was working on a particular problem, and we actually couldn't get it right. And I think I mentioned it to you, but I got a call on a Saturday morning from the client, sort of about 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. Yeah. And he said, hi, it's so-and-so here. And I thought, oh God, this is, we're going to
what's gone wrong?
He said, I'm really embarrassed to make this call. And I thought, okay, here we go. And he said, I've had an idea, Duncan. And I thought, oh my, and it turned out to be a brilliant idea.
I was going to say, normally when the client says, I've got an idea, you're like, oh no.
and I put the phone down from that moment, that ripple moment, and said, this is ridiculous. Our clients, when I met you went into the industry that you went into because you didn't want to be a solicitor or a lawyer or an accountant or an engineer. You wanted to do something creative, right? That was in there. But if you talk to most marketeers in organizations and say, well, how often are you doing something creative? They'll probably say never, very, very rarely. And that's wrong, because everybody is highly creative. It's like, when you're at school and you're told you're not very good at art.
So you don't do it anymore.
You
Yeah.
don't do it,
That's really
or
sad,
you
isn't it?
can't sing in the choir or something.
Yeah.
Everybody can draw and paint and visualize. And marketeers, you wouldn't be in this industry if you weren't creative.
Yeah.
And one of the things we do in our events and the work we do is allow that breathing, allow them to breathe creativity and to work intuitively about a situation.
I love that. And often when you talk about kind of breathing, you also talk about breathing together and that collaboration of the people around you. Can you talk a little bit about the collaborative process with people?
Yes, it's interesting because I think you might remember I use quite a lot of visual techniques and working with art, paint and brushes in some aspects. And I remember we were joined once on a big project by quite a qualified art teacher. She was at a university, and she said to me, I've never been involved with something that is collaborative art. Because if you think about it, it's really quite difficult to do that. I think that's why I like the Cirque du Soleil people, because they are collaboratively creating. But if you're an artist or you're a writer or you're a musician, musicians will collaborate. But it's quite difficult to collaborate artistically and collaborate creatively. But actually, it's not. Again, it's just about giving people the permission to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what I strive for.
And how do you give permission to dream? What do you actually do without giving away all your secrets to everyone else? Like, how do you get people in that state?
I think it starts and ends with a lot of techniques to access the right brain. Everybody thinks the right brain's the logical brain and the left brain is the thinking brain. It's the other way around. So the right brain is the brain of disruption, of ripples, of creativity. And I spend a lot of time helping the client teams get into a place of female energy. Female energy, in Native American terminology, is all about allowing things in, processing freely, and pushing it back out again in a shape that evolves and changes. So it's about right brain thinking. To answer your question succinctly, it's about helping people really get into. I mean, Edward de Bono's famous hats is a sort of leans towards that slightly. It's about, we'll put on a different color hat and you'll think creatively. My process is you've got that hat on the whole time.
You just need to access it.
You just need to access it, and often it's about permission to access it. Just giving people, again, going back to our clients who are all from the world of brands and marketing, they're all there for creative dreaming reasons. It's in there, it's within them. Although having said that, I've done this with political parties, I've done it with law companies, I've done it with people who you would not think are that creative. The political party, who shall remain nameless, that was quite funny. That was an extraordinary.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Irrespective of what somebody's job is, doesn't mean they're not creative. Even if you're an accountant, like, you can be exceptionally creative in your personal life. Maybe you're just not bringing it into your work, and maybe you should be.
Bring it in, allow it, let it in. This is the problem, that people think, well, at work I'm this. And again, since COVID, since working from home, maybe that's changed a lot, because, we're maybe, are we more our real person, because we're not sitting on the tube for an hour and a half every day or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because when we all started working from home in COVID, like, you see a little insight into people's lives. You see people's homes, and you learn a little bit more about people. And I think sometimes as well, like, when you're working from home, you do drop your guard a little bit because you are more relaxed because you're in your space. So I think it's quite interesting. But whether people are more creative at home, I personally would doubt. At least it's not my experience, because you feel the guilt of going back to back to back with meetings, and you don't allow yourself that time. I started to get to the point where I was literally, in my last role, I basically blocked out Fridays. So the Fridays was no laptop day, where you might need to get stuff done, sure. But it was like pen and paper, creativity, brain, thinking, strategy, process. How's that going to? And it was so beautiful. I did let it slip every now and again, which I always kind of felt terrible about. But dedicating time to strategic thinking, or really allowing yourself to get into that space. But it takes diligence, and it takes time.
I was going to say,
Or takes brilliant people like you to get it out of us.
how were you rigid and strong enough to ring fence that? That's the issue.
Yeah, and literally helps by just literally blocking your time. So when someone says, "Oh, I need to speak to Laura," oh, she's not available on Friday. She's got a full day workshop. It's
yeah,
actually not. It's what it looks like, but actually no, it's dedicated thinking time, because I guarantee that question will still be there on the Monday. So that was always one of my ways of trying to get to it. So any other ripple moments that stick in your mind that have either changed the way you think, the paths that you've gone down, the way you run your businesses? Any other big moments that stick out for you?
I think the big one was, when I was based in North America, and there were about 30 or 40 people working with me, and I had quite a big creative team. I always remember that they weren't getting things. Creatives, again, sticking my neck out. Creatives are not great at reading strategy, digesting information, data. They'll sort of very quickly go their own way. One of the moments, big ripple moment, was that I was at a dinner party. I ended up sitting next to someone who I didn't know. And when you do, you'll say, "What do you do? What do you do?"
Yeah.
And he was a professor, psychology professor at the university in Toronto. And I told him what I did. And he said, "Oh, what's your biggest problem?" And I started talking about the fact that my creative teams didn't really take stuff on board. And he said, "Well, let me come and work with you for 2 or 3 days." And that was a ripple moment, because what he opened up my mind to was what I call experiential learning. So instead of saying, "Read this, let me present this PowerPoint to you, let me tell you about this," it was more about creating an experience where the information could come through, sneak through the back door, through the side door.
I love
That was a
that.
massive, massive ripple moment for me. And that's how a lot of the work I do now evolved.
I love that, because that's about helping people feel it. Really
Yes.
feel it, not just read it in a PowerPoint or read a report, but actually really get it. Because I think, invariably we are not the consumer, and usually the executive team are definitely not the consumer. So it's how to get people to really feel and experience the problem or the challenge or the issue or the culture, dare I say. Like, there's a lot of businesses making decisions in spaces where they don't really deeply understand it as much, I believe, to really be able to activate powerfully without being kind of a little bit blind to what's truly going on. So I love that, getting people to really experience it. And that goes back to your example of the blue chip company going off for a safari for a few days.
Yes. But can I challenge you on what you just said about
Sure.
not the consumer? I think that's a different problem. We are the consumers. And I think one of the things that I'm passionate about is helping people connect with their consumer side. And actually, we are consumers, and allowing
Sure.
that feeling in, and saying, well, trusting your intuition. Again, intuition is a big, big thing. And we're sort of, intuition is slightly bludgeoned out of us again, in the way we work, the way we all
I
work.
love that. No, I agree. Look, I think my point was that yes, we're all consumers, but if you are a group of men building products for women who are breastfeeding,
So,
you might be able to understand a report, but can you truly empathize unless you've felt an experience? I would doubt. So my point is, like, how do you get people to really get into people's shoes and feel the emotions? Because I think the logical side of things you can read and understand, right? But it's how you get to the emotions that I think is where people really take things on board. And then people move mountains. You'll see it in meetings or businesses or even with friends and family. When people really get something, people will galvanize behind it. But if it doesn't feel relevant and it doesn't feel important, then it's easy to dismiss it.
yeah, no, exactly.
So what fuels your creativity? How does that work? Where do you start?
That's a good question. I think letting it be, really. I think what
Mm,
really fuels it. It's interesting, actually. I'll pick up on something you just said about breastfeeding. We had a client, this was in the States, which was all about breast pumps, the leading breast pump manufacturers. And we needed to get close to a load of wonderful ladies who were
yeah.
pumping,
Yeah.
why they did what they need to do that for their career or their work or whatever. And I spent 2 days with a load of American ladies who were in the middle of breast pump, not watching them breast pump, but they were.
Sure.
And to answer your question, it's about getting out there. Fueling my creativity is getting out there into the world and not sitting in your office in Manhattan or Paris or London and just saying, oh, I'm a brilliant person, I can come up with an idea. No, the ideas are out there. And so getting out there, watching, feeling, smelling, tasting, talking, not relying on the research or the brief or what you've been told, but get your hands really dirty. And that's how I always get fueled. So if I'm looking for an answer, I've done a number of times where I've taken for a project, I've taken 2 or 3 creatives with me. And we've gone off on a safari, on an adventure for like 4 or 5 days. We were doing something for one of the big supermarkets, looking at new ideas, new inspiration for Italian meals. And I thought, well, are we going to sit in an office and do that? And we didn't. We actually went out to Italy, got an Airbnb, and hung out, in places, and just ate and watched and created, and ate, watched and created, and watched and created. And that's the fuel for me, is the reality of what the problem is.
And the power of immersion and the power of observation, I think is beautiful. How do you know what the thing is to grab onto? How do you know those ripple moments are the ones worth grabbing? How do you do that? I was about to tell you how I do it, but
How do you do it? How do you do
for
it?
me it's gut and it's instinct.
Yeah,
It's the ooh moment. You read something or you hear something or you see something, you're like, that.
exactly.
It's
Exactly.
that.
It's exactly that. And it's back to what we were talking about. It's having your ears and your heart open to that tingle and
Yeah.
recognizing it. And if one is a musician or an artist or an actor or something,
Yeah.
I know with my music, if I'm rehearsing with my guys and you're playing something, there is that moment where you transcend where you are. It's almost a
Yeah.
quantum moment. And that works very easily when I'm playing my bass guitar with a band. And the thing is being open to that in the work we all do, in the world of branding and marketing, and having your ears open enough and your eyes open enough and really hearing it. And then when you
I
do
love
hear
that.
it, having the guts to go with it, because that's the
Yeah,
other
to go,
thing.
that's
If
it.
you're in an agency or
Yeah.
creative team, you've got to go and present that to a client and convince
Yeah,
them
yeah,
that
yeah.
it's right, which is
Yeah,
not
and I
easy.
think often with the agency and client, there is a core team, right? And they've been close to it throughout the journey. And almost that's the easier part of convincing the client who you're speaking to. The tough bit then comes when they then have to influence the rest of the business who have no connection to it whatsoever. And I've sadly been in moments where I feel I've failed because the most beautiful creative and content has come back and the insight has been so powerful. I remember a moment when I was working at Coca-Cola and an agency came back and presented the work, and genuinely, seriously, myself and the marketing director, I was leading insights at the time, she was really leading marketing, and we both cried because it was so beautiful and it felt so real and it genuinely touched me. Like, we were both crying in the meeting because we were like, this is so powerful. And it absolutely pains me to say that never got to
Yeah,
consumers, how
yeah,
it was in the original idea and the inception of that. And sadly, over time and over layers of teams, etc., it got watered down to
exactly.
something, and it was beautiful.
No,
How do we
exactly.
stop that? How do we stop that? Because it's happened to me twice, sadly, in my career. How do clients get
I,
from the beauty of what's initially presented actually to consumers, and it doesn't go through that process of getting watered down?
well, you know what? I think this is the challenge the industry has
Mm,
now, particularly,
yeah,
and it's worse than ever because the whole world of data, social media,
mm,
the way creativity is done now, AI.
yeah,
It's going to be one's going to have to be very strong on both sides to
yeah,
to create something and hold on to it, and from the client side to be bold enough to go with it. I think it's going to become increasingly difficult, without question.
Yeah, interesting. One final question for me. So we're calling our wonderful guests wave makers. What one piece of advice would you give to aspiring wave makers in the advertising and creativity world?
Oh God, I think, as I said to you at the beginning of this, most important thing is follow your heart and your soul, and really, almost therapeutically, ask yourself what you're really passionate about.
Yeah.
And try to manipulate your passion in the direction of what you want to do. I'm sure you do. I meet so many people now, middle-aged, financially comfortable and successful, got the house, but they've been going on the same train every day to their accounting offices or whatever it happens to be. They hate their job and they just made money. And is that what it's all about? I don't think so. And it's certainly not where good creativity and breakthrough change happens. So my big bit of advice is work out what your personal passion is, and then create a bridge from that personal passion to the career you think you're really interested in, and walk across that bridge, which isn't easy.
I love that. That is beautiful. Duncan, thank you so much. This has been so brilliant hearing your ripple moments behind the creativity and what you've been doing with organisations. I've had the joy of experiencing it, and I would highly recommend everybody picking up the phone and calling Duncan and saying, how can you bring that creative spark and disruption to our team and our business? Because it was a truly wonderful ripple moment for me in my career. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your journey and your story with us today. I love the thought that ripples can come from happy accidents. So being able to really grab onto those moments, witness them, see them, and then grab them and really do something about it, and have the courage to do that, and then have the courage to conspire with other people to do that with you. So thank you so much for your time.
You've been one of your first.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure, Duncan.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a wrap on this Ripple episode. So tune in weekly for more bold voices, inspiring wavemaker guests. I'm Laura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks, Duncan. Bye for now.